Hey everybody, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Straight Jacket White Rabbit. My name's Adam, and as usual, I'll be your host. You guys, today I want to talk to you guys about the Braxton County Monster. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's also known as the Flatwoods Monster. Now, this is going to take you way back till September 12th of 1952, you guys. Just before nightfall, in a very quiet town snuggled in the hills of West Virginia, Flatwoods, West Virginia to be specific, in Braxton County. Now, it's just before nightfall. The last bit of the sunlight gleaming over these hills. There's a group of kids playing near a nearby schoolyard. They're playing football, they're having fun. One of the kids all of a sudden stops what he's doing, points at the air, up in the air, and he shouts, "Look at that!" His friends all look up. To their amazement, coming closer overhead is a bright, fiery red and orange object with fire trails shooting off the back of it. The boys think at first they're seeing a meteor, but something's not right. This object is traveling slower than what they would expect a meteor to travel at, and it seems to almost be wafting and wobbling as it's coming in closer and closer for a landing or a crash. Now, the boys watch this thing, they say, for about 3 to 4 seconds. That's a decent amount of time for something that's flying overhead of you, meaning it wasn't going that fast. They watch this object crash or land at the top of a nearby hill that they believed was on their neighbor's property, on the back end of their neighbor's property. Two of the boys, really excited, take off towards their house to go get their mom. Two of their friends come in tow. Now, their mom is Kathleen May. Her two sons that were playing football were Ed and Freddie. Now, Ed and Freddie May, the kids who were playing football, their two friends that joined them were Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver. And I'm sorry, their third friend was Tommy Heyer. So the three friends plus the two boys rush off. They go to the two boys' mom's house, okay? At this point, Kathleen May is in her kitchen, and the boys bust in. And they're yelling, and they're very excited, and they're, Mom, we gotta go check this out. Something crashed up on the hill. We saw it. It was on fire, and they're just 100 miles an hour, completely, just rearing to go. The mom, without missing a beat, I love that she did this, just turns around, goes over to the table, picks up a flashlight, and tells them, "Well, you're not going alone." At this point, you have to keep in mind, this woman is now taking, I love this era back then for certain reasons, and one of which is, you gotta love the fact that these two kids, this is now past dark by the time they get to the mom's house. It's nighttime now. These two kids, who ended up, I guess, being they were neighbors, the neighboring kids from the May family. But their mom was perfectly okay with letting them go with the neighbor out into the woods, after dark, to go check out something, have their own little adventure. A lot of people wouldn't do that nowadays. I love the fact that they did that. But anyways, as they're walking out the door, they're met by yet another person, a man named Gene Lemon. He's a 17-year-old National Guardsman. People say the reason he was at the house is because he was related to Kathleen May. I believe, from what I read, he was her cousin. I could be mistaken, but I believe Gene was her cousin. Anyways, Gene was literally at the door as they're walking out, and he, wants to know what's going on. So Kathleen tells Gene what's going on and what the boys saw. At this point, the boys point out the fact that they can see a glow coming from the hilltop on their neighbor's back of their property. You can actually see a glowing orangish light. Accounts from some of the boys say that it seemed like the light was actually pulsating, this orangish light. So they leave their house, you guys, and they take the flashlight. They start trekking up into the hills. And for any of you who've been in West Virginia, it's fairly wooded areas in the area they're describing in Flatwood. So lots of trees, very woodland type area. And they're hiking up. It takes them a few minutes to get to where they can see something, but then they get in range and they can see down this little slope, I should say. It's not the complete hillside, but just a slope in the hillside. They can see a very large, lit up orange object that they believe is some kind of craft. Now, the traditional argument is that this is a meteorite. But the problem is this thing, it couldn't have been a meteorite. There were no seismic shock waves from the impact, and according to most of the boys, this object was larger than most planes seen flying anywhere near that area at that time. So, it had to be something of substantial size. Now, not all of the witnesses say they saw the craft. And this is a huge point that skeptics like to jump on, which honestly annoys the heck out of me. Because they're like, well, see, not all of them said they saw a craft. If you read the actual full reports and the actual witness statements, you would know that the reason not all of them saw this was because you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of small children with Kathleen. It's her two young sons, her cousin who's a 17-year-old, and then the neighbor kids. A lot of which were in the not like 7 to 10-year-old range. Okay? And a couple of the kids actually gave a statement to the local authorities when asked how come they didn't see the ship. They said, because, mister, I can't see over the grass. We were standing in an area that was very tall grassy area in the woodland. So amongst these trees there's tall grass. Once again, I've been to West Virginia, so I know the environment they're talking about. There are areas there that the grass can literally reach 4.5, 5 feet tall. So if you're only a 7-year-old, it would probably obstruct your view. All the other people who didn't see the craft actually stated the same thing. The first one to report he didn't see the craft was actually Tommy Heyer, one of the neighbor's children that was with Kathleen and the children. So they get closer and closer to where the actual impact they believed was, when all of a sudden this gets creepy. A mist so thick it looked like a thick rolling hill fog comes out of nowhere and engulfs the area that they're in. Now, Kathleen noted immediately that she was the first one to notice a distinct taste in the air. A metallic, I guess that's the only word she really used. I don't want to go on describing it for her. She described it as a metallic taste in her mouth, almost as if when back then how they described it was when the tubes for the old tube TVs would burn out, it would give you kind of like that metallic scent. That was the same taste she was having in her mouth, and the same smell they were smelling was that burnt metallic smell. Now, they're in the thick of it, man. Thick fog rolling in, creepy craft, meteorite, whatever it was, illuminating this orange little pulsating light that they all seem to have seen, sorry. And they're inching forward and they're getting nervous at this point. And right as they come to where they believe the mist is starting to thin out, they see it. Now, this monster, you guys, is unlike most alien descriptions that we get. Okay? They originally described it almost identically. Each single out of the 7 witnesses, they all described it eerily similar. They said that it had a rounded face or head placed in the middle of what appeared to be almost a spade-like cowl, like the piece that comes up from behind, and in the middle of this cowl area, or in front of this cowl, was this round head, no neck, just a round head set on the body. They said it had ember glowing orange to red eyes. Like I said, the spade-shaped cowl on the back. It had a metal... They didn't describe it as this, but what I'm going to describe it as is a chest plate. They said it was wearing metal clothes, but they described the top piece as more like armor, and they described what it was wearing on its lower half as some kind of a metallic skirt. Just like free-floating metallic cloth. Now, the reason I say free-floating is because, no, it was still attached to the rest of the torso and the rest of the creature, but this creature was standing with no visible legs, according to all witnesses, over 1.5 feet off the ground. It was hovering, or flying, whatever you want to call it. But it had no feet underneath this skirt object that they were looking at. They stood there for what felt like an eternity. Now, they admit that it was probably only a minute or two, but it felt like forever, standing there staring face to face with this enormous creature. The size of this creature, you guys, most aliens we see and we hear about being described, anywhere between 3 and 6-ish feet. Very rarely do we hear about large aliens. But this thing was said to be between 10 and 12 feet tall. That's enormous. According to all of the witnesses, though, its body was fairly proportionate. It had a large round head placed in the middle of that spade-looking cowl that was behind it. It seemed to have some kind of, like I said, chest-plated armor, a more solid metallic armor on its chest area, and then the metallic-looking skirt fabric material on its lower half, while floating 1.5 feet off the ground. Now, witnesses vary that the accounts that they were giving to the police didn't have this creature having long, spindly arms. But that's not true. 2 of the witnesses actually reported the creature having these arms. Now, why is this important again? Because they were the only ones that stayed long enough. They were the last 2 to see the actual creature before running off. Now, as they're standing there, and you know what, guys? I left out a funny, I'm sorry. I left out a funny and an interesting part of this. Right before they saw the creature, they're in the fog. Their family dog was with them. I'm sorry, I forgot this part. Their family dog's with them, right? And it's in this fog, and it goes off ahead of them. They lose sight of this dog. They're calling for it to come back. And they lose sight of this dog. But right before they get to the point where they actually see the monster, their dog comes tearing back past them, heading to the house, with actual accounts from the family saying that its tail was tucked between its legs and it was sprinting at full speed back towards the family's property. It wouldn't listen to response to come or to come back. They were calling for it. It did not come back. It left. Sad note, the dog turned up dead the next day in town. It was discovered by a local shop owner outside of his store. Cause of death unknown. Now, flash forward back to where we were. They're standing here for a minute or two. They're staring face to face with this enormous 10-foot, 12-foot tall creature. They said it almost seemed half robot, half like biological creature. Of course, they would say that. This is the 50s. They have no inkling of, fabric metal other than chainmail that knights used to wear. I'm sure this thing looked like something out of a 50s comic book to them. But all of a sudden, things got serious. Because this 10-foot strange creature that they are face to face with, 15 feet. 15 feet. The National Guardsman, the mom, both said that was about their approximate distance to this creature. Now, the reason that's important is because a lot of naysayers out there will go, well, maybe with all the mist and stuff you walked through, you didn't get a good look. At 15 feet, okay, I can tell you a lot about someone at 15 feet. Even at nighttime, even with all the other things they went through, 15 feet is not a big distance. At 15 feet, you guys, all of a sudden this thing quickly starts freaking floating towards them. Not walking, not running, just gliding. It has no legs. They don't see it walking like bipedally. It is flipping, floating at them. They get terrified, start screaming. The children are terrified. They're literally picking children up and running in the opposite direction. They get back to the house. Kathleen literally has them locking doors and windows, pulling curtains closed. She gets on the phone and is frantically trying to get a hold of the police department. Now, she gets a hold of the police department, who apologizes to them over their call wait about not answering the phones very fast, but they've been inundated with calls from people who saw this thing crash. Okay, now there are other reported witnesses in this case, you guys. I'll get to that here in a minute. But the police department's receiving all these calls. They tell them, look, we've seen this thing. We went up to where it was. We saw a creature. The police say they're going to dispatch some people. It's several hours before they're actually with police at the site. I'm sorry, they're not with police. The police are at the site that Kathleen had told them about. And the police don't really find much. They find some burnt brush. They did notice and put in a report, thankfully due to one officer who did his job correctly, that they did see that the trees were damaged, specifically branches being broken off and burns on some of these trees towards the tops of the tree. Burns towards the tops of the trees, like something crashed down through them, maybe. Now, military's official statement is that the National Guardsman and one other soldier, possibly the National Guardsman that was the witness, the 17-year-old, and possibly one other military personnel went to anywhere near this crash site to look at it. So basically they're saying they sent one guy. This falls apart quickly, you guys, because if you talk to the townspeople, which many people did, because as I said at the beginning of this story went everywhere. They had journalists in this town for months and months, you guys. Everyone, the very next day after the incident, all of Braxton County was in the town of Fleetwood, okay? Like, it was just, Flatwood. All of Braxton County was in Flatwood. Like, everybody. They all wanted to see what this family saw. Now, all that being said, you guys, like I said, there were other witnesses. A woman named Audra Harper claimed to have seen a similar creature in the woods near Heaters, West Virginia, shortly before the main incident actually happened. We don't have any witness statements from her or any evidence, but she claims she saw this thing while out in the wilderness. A mother and daughter in Weston reported nearly an identical encounter with a 10-foot tall creature and an irritating mist 1 week prior to the Flatwoods event. In their description, though, this craft had landed, not crashed. There were lights coming from the wooded area that they observed. They went to go see it. They saw this creature. They freaked out. They left. Very similar tale to the family and friends that experienced the Flatwoods monster. Okay, then you have Lee Stewart Jr., who's the editor of the Braxton Democrat, who visited the actual site the next morning and discovered skid marks and a weird, gummy, sticky deposit of some kind. Now, they didn't have up to par, analytical DNA testing and all that back then, so they didn't know what it is, and I couldn't find any report to say if they had ever identified this gummy substance left at the scene. Now, after Stewart Jr., the editor, there's a guy named Jack Davis, who's a local resident, who claimed to see a craft, not a meteor, flying at low speeds that same night. He thinks they were looking for the other craft. Another eyewitness, Paul Sagan, he's an eyewitness who later returned to Flatwoods to document and interview other witnesses for his book, Alien Flatwoods Monster. He went back and interviewed pretty much everybody in this entire town for this book, you guys. Anybody who saw anything, whether it was the ship coming down, whether it was what they thought was a meteor, whether it was the monster, whatever. But this is this is the evidence we have. There's an abundance of people who saw both the craft coming in, the craft supposedly beforehand, before it was even in trouble, we'll say, crashing, whatever. All manner of witnesses came out of the woodwork for this, you guys. For over a year, people were seeing things on and off around there. Strange craft flying in the vicinity. Odd creatures moving in the woods. Now, no one else but the original party and the mother-daughter combo in Weston, nobody else reported seeing the 10-foot tall creature, 10 to 12-foot tall creature. But Kathleen May, her sons, and their friends, and the mother-daughter that was in Weston that I just told you about, they all claim to have seen this creature. So, now, we have the military's official statement about there was only one person sent out other than the National Guardsman who was a witness on site. But we now know that's bull, you guys. We have numerous reports of unmarked military-style trucks, the ones with the big tarped backs, showing up in the area for over a week. On and off, back and forth for a week. Then you have some other weird stuff. Things that people claim were the men in black. They could just have been government investigators. We don't know. But 2 men showed up to Kathleen's house the next day, you guys, claiming to be reporters for a national publication. They wanted to get the scoop, so they had Kathleen tell them every bit of detail that they could. Now, after Kathleen shared her story with these 2 reporters, they went along their way, told her they'd be staying in town for a few days, and they went back to their hotel room, and Kathleen went back to doing what she was doing at her home. The next day, however, these 2 investigators showed back up, this time claiming to be government officials looking into the crash, explaining away their lies as, well, we didn't want you to hold anything back, knowing that you were speaking to the federal government. Were these men in black? Were they here to talk her out of what she'd seen? While they didn't directly tell her not to say anything, you guys, what they did do is try to, we'll say, roughly tell her, are you sure it wasn't a comet? How do you know it couldn't have been a meteorite? These things fall all the time around here. They kept leaning heavily on the space rock, or, the asteroid meteorite impact story. But Kathleen wasn't going to say that. Matter of fact, none of the witnesses were. The witnesses never changed their story. Not one word of it. Kathleen and the boys grew up being ridiculed in this town. People were actually angry after going and looking for this monster and not discovering it themselves. Because you have to remember, this threw an entire county, not just the town, into a panic. And there were people who were very angry with Kathleen and her boys, thinking that they were making this up, possibly even to cause panic. But that doesn't explain all the evidence. It doesn't explain trees with branches broken off at the tops of the trees. It doesn't explain the burnt tops of trees. It doesn't explain the odd mist and gas that these people walked through. Now, here's the other thing about this incident, you guys. There was another physical clue left behind in the form of the symptoms that all of the original observers went through. Now, most people today blame it on the mist. And I'm okay with that theory, if that's what caused their symptoms. I can see why people think that. But here's the thing. A lot of weird side effects have been reported from going near UFOs, you guys. Our own government, declassified papers, whistleblowers have all said that this technology, while it's operating from these craft, can cause really adverse effects to human physiology. These people were having troubles in their lungs, in their chest. They were having troubles breathing. Their throats were raw and sore. They were vomiting profusely all night long in a few of their cases. It was so bad, a few of them were actually hospitalized because they didn't know what was wrong with them. And while the doctors couldn't conclusively say anything, there's no shortage of theories, you guys, from military doing experiments in the areas and launching mustard gas. Now, that's one of the more fringier ones to me that the debunkers have thrown out there. Number one, I really doubt the military was just out right near where this thing happened to crash doing some kind of drill that somehow decided to use mustard gas, that close proximity on another man's property. Because remember, this is on their neighbor's property where this crash took place. There's just too many holes in that theory for me. This was either from the mist or the craft, in my opinion. This symptom, whatever you want to call it, disease, whatever went through the kids and everyone, they had this irritatingly dry throat that was sore. The inside of their mouths were sore and raw, almost like raw hamburger as they described it. So what did they see? We're talking about, like I said, we're talking about a craft that a few witnesses who watched it coming in said that they saw it as more of an oval shape or the typical flying saucer type shape. What are we to think about this? Was this a meteorite and just overactive imaginations of the boys? If so, how do you explain the mother's reaction or the National Guardsman? Now, keep in mind, 17 back in the 50s was not 17-year-olds of today. At 17, you were considered a man already. You had many responsibilities. This man was in the National Guard at 17, for God's sakes. How do you account for them seeing the same thing? All of the witnesses drew their own account of what the creature looked like, completely separated from each other. And they all drew the same creature. Different handwriting. I mean, the art looks different because they draw different. But the basic principles were there. The body shape, the head placement, the head shape, the big old spade-sized looking cowl behind this thing. I mean, it's just on and on and on and on. They had the details exactly right. From picture to picture. Now, Blue Book comes in and says, we're going to solve this case. And we all know Blue Book was full of it, okay? Even their own investigator, Hynek, thank God, later on in his years, decided to blow the whistle that this was bull and these things are real. And I give Hynek credit because as a man who started out as a logical, scientific-minded skeptic, after all his thousands of cases he looked at with Blue Book, he knew the truth. And the truth is you can't explain all of this stuff. A lot of this stuff you can. But you can't explain all of it. And there's a lot of them you can explain. And he knew at the end of his days that UFOs were real and it wasn't us piloting them. Now, you guys, alien stories happen a lot, okay? UFO stories happen a lot, but this one was important. We have government figures that appear to be almost Men in Black type people in nature. You have the military lying about their involvement. You have mysterious government trucks that were in the area with the tarped backs, hauling stuff away from the area. Why would you need trucks if all you recovered was a rock, a space rock? Couldn't have been a very big size. It wasn't like it would knock down huge trees on impact and stuff like that. If this was, a asteroid even the size of a Volkswagen, the impact alone would have shattered windows. You probably would have been looking at a sonic boom when it entered orbit. There's too many things that say that this was not an asteroid. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't a meteor. So what was the craft that they saw? Was it truly an extraterrestrial spacecraft? And what about the figure that they saw? All of the debunkers will tell you, oh no, it was a barn owl. A barn owl sitting on a large tree stump that had been cut off at 6 feet tall. Well, number one, I don't know how much lumberjacking the debunkers do, but when you're cutting a tree, do you typically cut it 6 feet in the air, straight across? No, you don't. When they go back to the area, there's no tree like that. There was a stump that was 3 feet tall. You're telling me that a barn owl sitting on a 3 foot tall tree stump, they mistook for a 10 foot tall creature that was floating? I have a hard time believing that. And you should too, quite frankly. It just doesn't sound right. It doesn't have the air of truth about it. Yes, there were other trees that this thing could have been perched on that weren't the specific one that they said they saw this creature near. But they said they saw it near the creature, which implies that they saw it and the creature. So how could the owl that was supposed to be perched on top of this cut down tree, how does that become the Flatwoods monster? Yes, it might explain some of the details, but what about the huge spade cowl behind its head? Owls don't have this. Now, skeptics have also tried to say that an owl that's puffing out its feathers can create almost like a peacockish appearance if you're looking at it dead on from the front, because their feathers do come up and out a little bit and splayed out, and they do this behavior. I'm not saying they don't. But you really think 7 witnesses, 2 of which were grown adults, 1 of which was a National Guard member, do you really believe that these people saw an owl? This is West Virginia. Owls are everywhere. How low of intelligence, are you insulting them? Are they just were they that, stupid? You're telling me people that lived in these back hills, played in these back hills, were comfortable enough going out at night with their neighbors' kids in the middle of the forest to go look for this thing. You're telling me these people don't know the animals in their own forest well enough to go, no, what I saw was an owl. But then yet saying they saw a 10-foot tall creature that looked alien and had weird glowing eyes and all these other things. Metallic clothes. I don't know about you, but the last time I've seen any kind of, wildlife, even huge owls or barn owls, last time I checked, they weren't wearing a skirt, let alone a skirt made of metal. They also didn't have a metal chest-plated armor-looking piece on, which all of the witnesses described. So how do we say that that's a logical conclusion to this story, is that it was simply an owl sitting on a tree? It's another Roswell all over again. They'll give us stupid explanations because, unfortunately, we live in a country where the vast majority don't believe that the government could be covering up something of this magnitude. Tip for you. They have. They are, and they will. The government's only going to come forward with the things that they have to come forward with, either because they were caught, or it was leaked, or some things like this. They're not going to come out voluntarily and tell you this, and back then they sure as heck weren't going to do it. They're not going to come out. We're talking in the days of the War of the Worlds broadcast, where they caused public panic in several cities because of a stupid radio show. Which, like I said, is neither here nor there, and I'm not saying they're justified in keeping the information because people will get scared. I'm not saying that, you guys. But what I am saying is that this is ridiculous to try to sit there and tell me that these people saw an owl and didn't know any better. If it was just the children, maybe. 7 to 10-year-old, active imagination, I can see it. Scary woods at night, burning, meteorite or comet in the background. They get freaked out. I get it. If it was just the 4 kids. I'm sorry, 5 kids. But it wasn't just the 5 kids. It was Ed and Freddie May. It was Neil Nunley. It was Ronnie Shaver. It was Tommy. That's not even including, like I said, Kathleen or Jean, the National Guardsman. Kathleen recounted later that for years she was teased. People told her, even though she didn't drink, but on social occasions, that she must have had a drinking problem or some kind of a drug problem. Some people even went as far as to suggest she might have had some kind of a mental problem. None of which had any credibility. Nobody had any evidence of this stuff. It was the town's way of dealing with the fact that she and her family and these kids riled up the town about a monster that the town couldn't find. Now, if there was an alien, was it picked up by another craft? Remember, the other witnesses we reported saw crafts flying around for weeks after this at nighttime, combing over the hills. Some people claim that they saw craft low enough to be 40, 50 feet over the treetops of these hills. That's fairly low. So what do you think they saw in the Flatwoods monster incident? Was it a cryptid? Was it really an alien from an actual crashed UFO that was retrieved? If it wasn't, what about the government agents that showed up lying about who they were, claiming to be press, and then coming clean and saying they were part of a government organization that was investigating? I love this story because there are so many witnesses, so many different details, and different parts of the UFO lore. We have Men in Black, government interference. We've got the actual creature, which is unlike any other description of the creatures that we normally see. And let's be frank, back then, this was a really original description of an alien. Most aliens on TV and comic books and things like that, you guys, back in the 50s, were literally drawn as little green men. That's how they were drawn, the majority of the aliens back then. Or as robots. But the majority of the aliens you see on any comic book, magazine, anything from that time period, they all had one thing in common. The aliens were like this big. They were itty bitty. Now we have a family and friends all saying they saw something that was between 10 and 12 feet tall. So did they really see an alien? Did they see a cryptid? Or was it just their minds playing tricks on them? Is it like some conspiracy theorists believe? Was it a government operation in the area that used gases that had hallucination properties in them? Was the family doped by hallucinogens? If so, what really crashed there? Was it just coincidental timing that they came up to investigate this crashed ship, meteorite, asteroid, whatever it was, right when a military exercise was going on in the area? That seems a little bit of a stretch to me, but I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about this story. Any other things like this you've heard. As always, you guys, feel free to email me with any kind of stories or pictures or anything paranormal that you've encountered. I love hearing from you guys. I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers, all of you who hit the like buttons in there. A special, huge thanks, you guys, to all my members. My members are my bread and butter. I don't make a lot doing this. I'm trying to make this a full-time gig so that I can be on here a lot more with you guys and doing this instead of a regular full-time job, which will also help me out because it'll also allow me to be near my son a little bit more instead of at work. So I'm going to try to pump this out as much as I can this year. I'm going to put out videos. I'm going to start doing lives here soon. I know a lot of you guys can't wait. I'm really close, I promise you guys, to my first live. I will give you guys days notice. I'm not going to put out a notice the same day telling you I'm doing a live. I will give you advance notice of when I'm doing my first live so I can make sure all of my fans who want to come and be a part of that can do so. So I will give you a couple days notice before we're going to do that. And you guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it short here. It's getting late, so I just wanted to tell you guys, look out for each other, be kind to each other. We're living in a messed up world right now, and I think all of us could use a little kinder-hearted people. We could all use a little more niceness in the world. So take care of each other, love each other as always, you guys, and this is Straight Jacket White Rabbit saying, I'll catch you later.